The convoy had been stopped for 3 minutes when Petty Officer Jake Hammer Morrison realized they weren't alone in the jungle. But what was that sound, exactly, that came from the darkness? It wasn't the radio. The radio was only crackling with barely audible whispers, the desperate, hushed code of men who understood they were already dead. Multiple contacts. Surrounded. Estimate 50 plus hostiles. Closing the noose. This was the final, ragged prayer of operators who knew they had driven straight into a black hole of violence. Jake Morrison, a decorated SEAL with 6 deployments, could feel the jungle pressing in. It wasn't just the dense, suffocating green of the Colombian interior. It was the psychological weight of an ambush meticulously prepared. They were supposed to be extracting a high-value intelligence asset, a clinical, in-and-out grab. Instead, they had hit a wall of hostile fire and silence. The trees were silent now, unnaturally so. Silence was the language of predators. Morrison's mind was calculating escape vectors, finding none. He could hear his own frantic heartbeat, feel the sweat running down his spine, cold and immediate despite his training. This was how operators died. Trapped on a jungle road, nowhere to run, with an enemy that knew every tree, every shadow, every kill zone. Morrison gripped his M4, his knuckles white, his breath short and ragged. Anxiety was a living thing in the humid air, shared and suffocating the oxygen they needed to fight. This wasn't a fight, this was an execution. He glanced back at the Humvee containing the asset, a pale, terrified man who was now the gravitational center of their imminent destruction. The man who wasn't worth the lives about to be spent. He felt the system failing them, the bureaucratic delays, the intelligence gaps, the sheer, frustrating stupidity of protocol that insisted they wait for air support that would never arrive in time. Then it happened. From the darkness beyond their perimeter, from the impossible depths of the jungle where no one should be, came a sound that made the hair on his neck stand up. It wasn't a sustained burst of automatic fire. That would be chaotic. That would be a fight. This was different. This was cold. Crack. The sound of an M4 rifle configured for precision shooting. A single, distinct, professional crack. Then the sound of something heavy hitting wet dirt. Crack. Another shot, another kill confirmed. There was no wasted movement, no burst fire, just the cold, rhythmic punctuation of controlled lethality. Crack, crack, crack. 4 shots. 4 hostile contacts immediately ceased fire and dropped into the undergrowth. The enemy didn't immediately return fire on the unseen position. They paused. They hesitated. Confusion was a momentary luxury Morrison hadn't expected to be granted in this hell. The mystery was instantaneous, absolute. Who was out there? One person, working alone, hunting the hunters with the lethal, dispassionate patience of a jungle cat. It was impossible. Their intelligence said the nearest friendly unit was over 300 kilometers away. No one knew they were here. No one but their command structure, which was now silent. The sudden intervention didn't bring hope. It brought a terrifying kind of suspense. Who was saving them? And why had they waited until the enemy was already closing the noose? Morrison whispered into his comms mic, his voice tight. Blue team, hold fire, new contact. Friendly, possibly, repeat, hold fire. A junior operator muttered back, his voice shaky. Hammer, friendly fire doesn't sound like that. That sounds like a ghost. The shooting stopped for 5 seconds, a pregnant pause in the suffocating quiet. Then the inevitable return fire began, not directed at the convoy but directed into the darkness where the unknown shooter was positioned. Chaotic, wasted fire. The enemy was scared. Crack. One more shot, one more fighter silenced. The fire from the darkness wasn't just killing. It was directing the enemy's attention, drawing their focus away from the trapped convoy. It was a calculated sacrifice, a deliberate invitation to be hunted. Morrison felt a soft moral reflection begin to form. What kind of operator trades their safety for the survival of strangers? What kind of courage exists outside the structure of a team? He realized the intervention wasn't about heroism. It was about cold, hard determination. It was about a single mind processing the geometry of the jungle and finding the one line of fire that mattered. He started barking orders, his anxiety replaced by purpose. Alpha, focus on the immediate perimeter. Beta, provide suppressing fire. That shooter is buying us time. Don't waste it. The convoy started moving again, crawling forward under the cover of the impossible marksman in the dark. The unseen shooter was threading the needle, making perfect kills without ever revealing her position, using the M4 not as an assault weapon, but as a surgical instrument. Each shot was a whispered promise of death. Morrison looked out at the jungle, a dark, hostile wall of green. He strained to see the flash, the muzzle signature, anything. He saw nothing, only the cold, clean geometry of bodies falling. The terror hadn't gone away, but it had shifted. Now the terror belonged to the enemy. They were being picked off by an invisible force, a lethal, efficient phantom. He'd seen his enemy fear before, but he'd never seen them fear a silence like this. The fire from the jungle intensified again, but it was aimless, desperate. The rhythm of the unknown shooter, however, remained constant. Crack, reload, reposition, crack. A relentless mechanical efficiency. The convoy managed to push another 50 meters down the road, closer to the designated clear zone. Morrison looked at the jungle, and a new fear surfaced. Would she run out of ammo before they ran out of road? The survival of his entire team now depended on the unknown capacity and resolve of a single, invisible operator who was willing to commit the most profound act of sacrifice, fighting a war alone. He knew one thing for certain. When the morning came, and if any of them survived, they would have to find the person who fired those shots. They had to know who had rewritten the terms of their survival, and who had paid the price for their freedom. The SEALs were running on borrowed time, bought with precision fire and silent determination. The noise, the M4's crack, was saving their lives, but the silence that followed each shot was the chilling sound of a soul moving alone through the absolute dark. The final few hundred meters of the ambush zone were the worst. The enemy was panicking, charging the convoy, trying to rush the last barrier. The cracks from the darkness came faster now, almost frantic, emptying the magazine, working the rifle to its absolute limit. Then, for the first time, a small muzzle flashed deep, deep in the tree line, a tiny, almost imperceptible whisper of light. And then silence, the sound of the convoy escaping the kill zone. The silence was total. The convoy sped through the clear zone, leaving behind 20 minutes of spent brass, blood, and the unresolved mystery of the operator who had saved them. Morrison could only whisper, "Who was that?" He got no answer, only the roar of the engine and the beating of his own anxious heart. The lesson was learned in the hot Colombian air. The jungle remembered, and the jungle had its own protectors. Why was she watching them instead of helping? The question hung heavy in the smoke-filled air, long after the convoy had vanished. For Staff Sergeant Maya Wood, the answer was simple: because help that arrives late is a casualty of protocol. She didn't run towards the road. She didn't signal the SEALs. She didn't seek thanks. She melted back into the shadows of the jungle, her M4 still warm, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and adrenaline. The mystery was not who she was, but why she was there, 3 days into a solitary, unsanctioned operation. The mission began in a sterile, freezing debriefing room back at the main base. Maya, a sniper specialist, was present not to lead but to consult, and to be ignored. She had voiced her concerns about the proposed extraction route 3 days prior. Her voice, calm and measured, was swallowed by the booming assurance of the lieutenant commander running the operation. Staff Sergeant Wood, we appreciate your input on the local terrain, but frankly, you are not authorized to comment on asset extraction procedures. The message was clear. She was a map specialist, a technical consultant, a woman whose expertise was acknowledged but whose judgment was dismissed the moment it conflicted with the established, male-dominated chain of command. That feeling of being dismissed, of having vital intelligence filed away under unnecessary caution, ignited a quiet, deep-seated fire of determination in her gut. She knew the jungle. She knew the local networks. She knew that route was a known choke point. They saw the rules. They didn't see the ground. The moral reflection was immediate. The integrity of the mission must always supersede the politics of the planning table. She couldn't call them fools. She couldn't yell. She had to act. She had already planned her departure. She packed 3 days of rations, extra water, and 6 magazines of precision 5.56 ammo, the high-grade rounds she loaded herself. She took the M4, the rifle she had customized for long-range engagement and silent operations. It wasn't standard issue for a sniper role, but its versatility was essential for the transition from distance hunting to close-quarters survival. Maya had walked out of the base 20 minutes after the briefing ended, not in a helicopter, not in a truck, on foot. She tracked the SEAL convoy for the next 72 hours. A grueling, silent, self-imposed march through the triple canopy jungle, moving parallel to their route, maintaining a 3-kilometer distance. She was tracking the convoy for 2 reasons, both rooted in the central mystery she had uncovered. First, she didn't trust the intelligence. She suspected a leak, an insider threat that led the SEALs to a trap. If they were ambushed, she had to be the final insurance policy, the one element the enemy would never anticipate. Second, the high-value intelligence asset HVA. The official briefing named him simply Subject Delta. But Maya knew his true identity from an old, classified file she had accidentally accessed years ago. The HVA was a former colleague, a man who had once been a friend, then a mentor, then a source of profound, personal conflict. A man who had done things she couldn't forgive, but whose life she was now morally obligated to protect. This profound, personal connection introduced the true internal conflict of ignored expertise and unwanted loyalty. She had chosen this path alone, risking court-martial, because she couldn't allow him to die, not for the mission's sake, but for the dark, unspoken history they shared. The 3 days of tracking were a masterclass in silent movement. The jungle was her ally. She moved with a liquid ease, reading the soil, the broken leaves, the disturbed air. She ate quickly, slept lightly, and never stopped listening. When she heard the distant, muffled sound of the first explosion, the planned distraction that stopped the convoy, she was already within a kilometer of the ambush zone. She didn't rush. Rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes led to death. She moved to the best possible vantage point, a small, dry ridge line 250 meters from the road, a position that offered clean sight lines through the dense foliage but kept her perfectly obscured. She saw the 50-plus enemy fighters closing in. She saw the SEAL team paralyzed by protocol and fear. She saw the failure of the planning table playing out in front of her. She set up the M4, adjusted the magnification, and calculated windage, humidity, and lead time. She waited until the enemy was too close to retreat, too committed to the kill. Then she took the first shot. Crack! The sound wasn't heroic. It was inevitable. It was the sound of a mistake being corrected by the one person who had been smart enough to be there. She stayed on the ridge, her position now abandoned. The 15 minutes of precision fire had been a sprint, a controlled explosion of silent violence. She had made 17 confirmed kills, targeting leadership, heavy weapons, and immediate threats. She had used up 3 full magazines of her custom ammo. She had saved them, and now she had to vanish. As she melted back into the dense undergrowth, she didn't feel proud. She felt the cold, hard weight of the decision she now faced. Does she make contact with the SEALs and face the court-martial, or does she disappear and leave the mystery intact, protecting her own shadow existence? She chose the shadow. She chose the silent moral path. She had completed her unsanctioned mission. The SEALs were safe, and the HVA was moving toward the exfil point. Her debt was paid, but the price of that debt, the truth about the HVA and the betrayal that set the trap, was still locked in her memory. She continued moving north, away from the chaos, away from the rescue, away from the system she knew would punish her for saving lives the wrong way. She knew the jungle better than the men who tracked her, and she knew her duty better than the generals who signed her orders. She felt a sharp pain in her shoulder, a sudden, blinding fire. But why hadn't she heard the shot? Maya was 3 kilometers north of the ambush, moving at a sustainable combat pace. Her adrenaline was receding, replaced by the deep, physical drain of 3 sleepless days. She had relaxed, just for a moment. The pain was immediate and shocking. Not the gentle tap of a near miss, but a brutal, tearing force that spun her around. She hit the ground hard, the M4 skittering across the wet leaves. Her right shoulder was instantly useless, a dead weight pouring heat into her jacket. She was down, broken. The first thought wasn't about the wound, but about the silence. She hadn't heard the shot, a suppressed round, a professional. They tracked the gunfire. The enemy hadn't been defeated. They had simply sent their own hunter. She scrambled desperately to retrieve her rifle, using only her left hand. The moral reflection was crushing. You can beat the system, but you can never cheat the geometry of the battlefield. She had exposed her position to save others, and now she was paying the price. She rolled onto her back, drawing the compact Glock 19 from her chest rig. A shadow moved in the dense foliage 50 meters away. Not a local fighter, too fast, too composed. This was the source of the mystery she had anticipated, the insider threat, the person who knew the trap and now knew who had broken it. She saw him emerge fully, a man in tactical gear, not paramilitary but dressed in high-grade, unmarked Western equipment. He held a silenced M4, a ghost of their own kind. She knew him, knew the face, knew the skill set. This was the man who had set the trap for the convoy, the man who was working with the enemy. The scene flashed back, an old mission, a shared deployment years ago. This man, then her trusted partner, had made a decision, a choice that involved betrayal, a theft of intelligence, and the death of 2 of their team members. A crime Maya had sworn to keep silent to protect a wider, more sensitive operation. This was the true purpose of her unsanctioned mission, not just to save the HVA, but to find the snake. She realized now the SEAL's extraction route was the bait, the HVA was the prize, and she was the unintended complication. The man raised his rifle, no words, no negotiation. Maya didn't wait. She fired the Glock twice, aiming for the center mass, her left hand steady despite the pain. The shots were off. He was too fast. He vanished back into the shadows. He wasn't trying to finish her now. He knew she was wounded. He wanted to force her to retreat, to bleed out, to suffer. The battle became one of time, not fire. She forced herself up, ignoring the blinding pain in her shoulder, grabbing her M4 and stuffing it under her arm. She was facing her personal past, her greatest internal conflict, in the darkest place she had ever been. She had to stay alive to expose him, to fulfill the vow she'd made years ago to the men he betrayed. The hope that she could survive this, the determination to see the mission through, was the only thing keeping her vertical. She knew she couldn't win the gunfight wounded. She had to win the terrain. She turned her back on the road and plunged deeper into the jungle, moving toward the only place she knew he wouldn't follow her immediately, the Black Falls Gorge. The place where no one went, not even the locals. He was tracking her now, methodically, patiently. But what did he truly want that the convoy hadn't delivered? The next 6 hours were a waking nightmare of pain and tactical evasion. Maya was running on pure adrenaline and years of ingrained training. She had used the pressure bandage from her kit, but the wound was deep, the loss of blood significant. The primary emotion was a profound, cold vulnerability. She was hunted by her own kind, in a hostile environment, injured and entirely alone. She was leading her pursuer, the traitor, toward the Black Falls Gorge. She knew he wouldn't follow her into the gorge itself. It was too treacherous, too complex. But she was using the terrain to slow him down, to bleed his momentum. She set up 3 simple, silent booby traps, not explosives, but trip lines connected to loud, jarring metal objects designed only to announce his location, to chip away at his composure. The first trap snapped 45 minutes later. A loud, metallic clatter followed by an immediate, low curse. He wasn't careless, he was frustrated. The mystery wasn't the identity of her pursuer, but his objective. He had the HVA, the asset he had betrayed the convoy to acquire. Why was he spending precious daylight tracking her? The convoy hadn't delivered the full price. The answer clicked into place, a devastating revelation. The HVA, her former colleague, had carried a piece of intelligence external to his own person, a physical item, a data drive, or a specific key. The HVA must have entrusted it to Maya during their shared past, a hidden piece of leverage or proof that only she could access. The moral reflection hit her with renewed force. The true value of a mission is never the paper asset. It's the hidden truth that asset protects. She had saved the SEALs, but she was now the bearer of the true payload. She reached the perimeter of the Black Falls Gorge. It was a sheer cliff face dropping 300 meters, carved out by a violent river that now ran low, revealing a treacherous, jagged path along the base. No one used it. She located the hidden crevice she had marked years ago during a previous survey, a tiny, vertical passage known only to her. She forced herself into the narrow opening, tearing her uniform, grinding her wounded shoulder against the rock. The pain was a dull roar now, something she simply had to endure. She heard him reach the gorge entrance. He stopped. He knew the gorge was a trap, a logistical nightmare. Maya, his voice echoed, low and desperate. Don't be a hero, give me the drive. No one needs to know you were here. He was offering her an out, a chance to save her career, her life. All she had to do was surrender the mystery, the hidden truth. She didn't answer. She climbed deeper into the rock. She felt a fierce, burning pride in her silence. Her refusal was the final, unwritten oath to the men he had killed. She had chosen the painful path of truth, and now she had to fight the man who represented the lie. The air was thin, the ascent impossible, but what was waiting for her at the very top of the ridge? The climb through the vertical crevice was a slow, agonizing process of resilience. It required upper body strength, something her wounded right arm could no longer provide. She had to rely entirely on the leverage of her legs and the raw, unused power of her left arm, hauling her weight up centimeter by centimeter. The psychological battle was crushing. Every fiber screamed at her to stop, to rest, to give up the fight. She was fighting 2 things, the pain and the memory of the man who betrayed her. She used the internal dialogue as a distraction, reliving the moment years ago when she knew for certain her partner was compromised. It wasn't a sudden discovery. It was a slow drip of small, quiet mistakes that added up to a mountain of proof. A weapon misplaced. A comms encryption key left exposed. The moral reflection was clear. Betrayal is rarely loud. It is a slow, methodical rot. When she finally pulled herself over the lip of the gorge, onto the highest ridge line, she collapsed, sucking in the cool, clear air. The climb had taken 4 hours. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the Colombian Valley. She was determined to find a secure place, to treat her wound, and to plan her counterattack. But waiting for her at the top of the ridge was a helicopter. Not the SEALs, not the traitor. A private helicopter, heavily modified, painted in civilian blue, sitting silently on the remote landing pad. And standing next to it was the high-value intelligence asset, HVA, the man she had risked her life to save. He was clean, unharmed, looking surprisingly composed. The mystery deepened into a labyrinth of betrayal. If he was already here, waiting, he had never been the primary target. The SEALs hadn't been ambushed for him. They had been ambushed for her. The HVA saw her fall onto the ridge. He walked over slowly, his face devoid of gratitude, only pity. "Hello, Maya," he said, his voice quiet, familiar, laced with regret. "I told them you'd be the one to break the siege. You were always too predictable when your conscience was involved." The devastating truth broke her. The internal conflict of her life's devotion, her unwavering duty, was being used as a weapon against her. She wasn't saving him. She was walking into a trap set by him. "The drive," she gasped, forcing the words out through the pain. "You set up the SEALs to cover my escape, knowing I would come after you to get the drive." The HVA nodded, his expression a final, cold confirmation of the ultimate betrayal. He wasn't the victim. He was the architect. He explained the truth of the trap in agonizing detail. But why did he look so deeply unhappy about her survival? Maya lay on the ground, the pain receding behind a shocking wall of cold, analytical thought. The betrayal was complete. The initial broken feeling morphed into a fierce, calculating determination. The HVA explained the entire plot. He was working for a shadow corporation that needed the key to a global financial system, the drive that Maya unknowingly carried. The initial extraction convoy was a distraction to test and eliminate known threats. The ambush was set by his other handler, her former partner, knowing Maya would violate protocol to save the convoy and him. "You risked everything for a ghost of a man, Maya. You should have just stayed on base." The moral reflection was staggering. The line between duty and self-destruction is often defined by who profits from your sacrifice. She had committed the ultimate moral act, abandoning her entire life to save others, and it was all for a lie. She forced herself to sit up, using the rifle as a crutch. "Where is the drive?" the HVA asked, his voice now purely professional. "You know I never told anyone where I hid it," Maya countered, a small flicker of pride in her eyes. "That's why you need me alive." The HVA smiled, a genuine sad expression that was more chilling than anger. "Your former partner, the man who shot you, he's not happy with the mess you've made. He's coming here. He needs to eliminate the threat you pose to his new life." Why did he look so unhappy about her survival? Because the HVA felt a residual, twisted loyalty to her. He was a moral coward who regretted the necessity of her death, but not the necessity of his mission. Maya realized her former partner, the traitor, wasn't just coming to kill her. He was coming to salvage the entire operation, which was now compromised by her escape and the HVA's emotional weakness. She had to turn the tables. She had to use the one weapon they thought she had exhausted, her silent resilience. "I will give you the drive," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. "But first we wait for him. You need him gone and I need him exposed." The HVA hesitated, a flicker of fear in his eyes. He realized he had walked into a second trap, a human one. The tension was immediate. Maya had turned a prisoner exchange into a three-way standoff, with her wounded self holding the tactical high ground. She knew the traitor would arrive within the hour, using the most direct route. She looked at the HVA, her eyes cold. "You want to live, you want your money, then you follow my lead. You're still my asset, my mission." He was 20 minutes out, according to the HVA's frantic estimate. But why was the traitor so desperate to keep her alive for the last 5 minutes? Maya took control of the small, secluded ridgeline. Despite her pain, her authority was absolute. The HVA, a man who dealt in shadows and manipulation, crumbled under the weight of her physical determination. She had him disarm himself and use his comms to track her former partner, the traitor. The traitor was closing fast, moving with the same relentless efficiency Maya knew well. She set up her final perimeter. The M4 was ready, propped on a piece of rock, sighted on the main approach route. She had only one magazine left. 2 more magazines were hidden in the jungle where she had stashed her reserve gear. The moral calculus was brutal. 1 magazine for 1 target, no room for error, no second chances. The HVA grew frantic. He's 5 minutes out, he knows I'm here, he'll kill us both. Tell me where the drive is. Why was the traitor so desperate to keep her alive for the last 5 minutes? The final, bitter truth, the drive, the key to the global network, was protected by a biometric lock, Maya's retina scan. The traitor couldn't access the final data without her. He needed to capture her, not kill her. This gave Maya the ultimate leverage. She was essential to their success. She looked at the HVA. I will not give him my retina scan, she said simply, but I will give him a choice. She knew the traitor's ego. He would try to talk her down, to convince her to join him, to use his familiar voice to break her resilience. She ordered the HVA to signal her former partner on an open channel. She's here, the HVA whispered into the mic, his voice shaking. She's wounded. She wants to talk. She has the drive. She wants you to come alone. It was a blatant lie, but it appealed to the traitor's arrogance. Maya braced herself, steadying her aim with her good left arm. This wasn't a military operation anymore. It was a confrontation with the ghosts of her past, the final, terrifying moment of her personal redemption. She was ready to pay the ultimate price to stop the man who had destroyed her life and threatened the world. He stood in the clearing, rifle lowered, trying to reason with the ghost. But what was the one thing he didn't realize she was aiming at? The traitor emerged from the jungle line. He saw the HVA, hands raised, and Maya, wounded, propped up with the rifle. He stopped 30 meters away. His rifle was lowered, a practiced gesture of false truce. He was relying on her injury, her emotional fatigue, and their shared history. Maya, he said, his voice soft, familiar, the voice of an old friend. Don't do this. You fought your ghost. You've saved the convoy. Now let me finish the mission. We can walk away from this together. No one needs to know you left the base. The emotional conflict was overwhelming. He was offering her back her life, her career, her dignity. All she had to do was surrender to the lie. She felt a surge of pure, cold pride. I came here for justice, not amnesty, she replied, her voice rough. You set the trap. You killed those men. I know about the key. He took a step forward, his voice turning desperate. Maya, please, I need your eyes. Without your scan, the drive is useless. The entire plan fails. He was confessing the final piece of the mystery. He needed her alive. But what was the one thing he didn't realize she was aiming at? It wasn't his head. It wasn't his chest. Maya shifted her scope a centimeter to the left. She was aiming at the HVA. She knew the traitor's plan. Capture her, force the scan, kill her and the HVA, and claim the drive. She had to deny him the key piece of the puzzle. She had to eliminate the asset he needed to survive. Her moral reflection was the final, devastating choice. Sometimes, saving the world requires the ultimate sacrifice, killing the innocent to stop the guilty. She pulled the trigger. Crack! The bullet struck the HVA directly in the head. He crumpled instantly, falling onto the drive, his body shielding it. The traitor froze, his face a mask of shocked horror, rage, and sudden, absolute defeat. She had destroyed his mission. She had made the asset unusable. She had won, but at a terrible, irrevocable cost. The traitor roared, raising his weapon. Maya didn't wait. She squeezed the trigger, her final precision round hitting him square in the throat, silencing his betrayal forever. She was lying in the cold mud, the silence total. But what was that weight, heavy and familiar, pressing against her chest? The world went dark. When Maya woke, the sun was setting again. She was lying in the cold mud, her wounded shoulder screaming. The bodies were silent. The mission was over. The silence was total. But what was that weight, heavy and familiar, pressing against her chest? It was her M4 rifle. She had pulled it close before she lost consciousness. The internal beat was slow, ragged. She was alive. The drive was inaccessible. The threats were neutralized. The hope that she could walk away from this was thin, fragile but present. She struggled to her knees, looking at the two silent bodies, the architect of the betrayal and the man who executed it. She had nothing left but her resilience. She retrieved her 2 remaining magazines from the hidden stash. She didn't call the base. She didn't seek the amnesty she had earned. She had broken the system to save it, and she would now accept the silence she had imposed. She walked out of the gorge, leaving the bodies and the silenced mission behind. She spent the next 2 weeks navigating the treacherous, unmarked territory, walking toward the only place where she felt she might find forgiveness, the place where the only currency was truth. She walked until she hit a small, remote extraction point known only to the highest levels of command. She was a ghost walking out of the darkness. The general looked at the after-action report, his face unreadable. But what did he hand her that was wrapped in black velvet? Staff Sergeant Maya Wood stood at attention, 2 months later in a sterile, silent room. The court-martial proceedings were underway, not against her, but against the ghost she had created. The commanding general, the man who held her career and her freedom in his hands, looked at the after-action report. The official record stated that the SEAL convoy was saved by an unknown, highly professional operator, and the high-value asset and his treacherous handler were killed by unknown forces in a subsequent firefight. The lie was clean. The system had protected itself by erasing her crime and her sacrifice. The general looked up at Maya, his expression one of weary respect. Staff Sergeant Wood, the file on your unauthorized absence is sealed. You are officially reprimanded for abandoning your post. However, due to your indispensable technical expertise, you are being reassigned to a new, highly classified role. She accepted the reprimand with a simple, "Yes, sir." She had expected nothing less. But what did he hand her that was wrapped in black velvet? It was small, cold, and heavy. She opened the wrapping. Inside was a single, perfect SEAL trident cast in dull, unpolished metal. Not hers. It was Jake Morrison's, the SEAL she had saved, the one who had seen her excellence even in the darkness. The general whispered. Morrison said the man who saved them was the best operator he ever saw. He wanted you to know that the men you saved, they remember the sound of your rifle. The flood of emotion was immediate. She felt a profound, private pride. The system might ignore her, but the operators, the men on the ground, they knew the truth. The final moral reflection was complete. She had sacrificed her official career for her personal duty, and in doing so had earned a higher, silent honor. The uniform changes, the mission changes, but the calling remains the same. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.